Before I tell you this story, I need you to do something for me. Think about someone who made you feel small, someone who looked at you like you were nothing, someone who told you that you would never amount to anything. Do you have that person in your mind? Good. Now imagine watching their faces crumble. Imagine watching their arrogance melt away. Imagine the exact moment when they realize they lost. That's what this story is about. And trust me, the ending is going to be worth every single second. So stay with me. Don't click away. Because what happens in that lawyer's office? It's the kind of justice that only happens once in a lifetime. I will never forget the look on my mother's face. She was sitting in that leather chair, dressed in her finest clothes, pearls around her neck, looking at me like I was nothing more than dirt beneath her expensive shoes. And with a cold smile, she said the words I had heard my entire life. You were always a disappointment. You will get nothing. Absolutely nothing. My stepbrother sat beside her, grinning from ear to ear. He had already won, or at least, that's what he thought. But then the lawyer opened a folder. He adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat. And what he said next made my mother's smile disappear forever. Her jaw dropped. Her hands started shaking. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw fear in her eyes. But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what the lawyer said, you need to understand something. You need to understand who these people really were. You need to understand what they did to me. And you need to understand why this moment meant everything. So let me take you back to where this story truly begins. And trust me, what you're about to hear is going to make that ending hit so much harder. I was born into what most people would call a good family. My father was a kind, hard-working man. He owned a small construction business that he had built from nothing. He wasn't rich, but he was comfortable. He had earned everything through sweat and sacrifice. My mother? She was beautiful, charming, the kind of woman who knew how to smile at the right people and say the right things. Everyone in our small town adored her, but behind closed doors, she was a monster. You know, it's funny how some people can fool the entire world. They wear masks so perfect, so convincing, that nobody sees the darkness underneath. But the people who live with them, the children who depend on them, they see everything. You see, my mother never wanted me. She told me this when I was 7 years old. I remember it clearly. I had come home from school with a drawing I made for her. It was a picture of our family, my dad, my mom, and me, standing in front of our house with a bright yellow sun. I was so proud of it. I couldn't wait to show her. But when I ran into the kitchen and handed it to her, she barely glanced at it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice flat. "It's us, Mommy. It's our family." She looked at it for a long moment. And then, and I want you to really picture this, she crumpled it up slowly, deliberately, and threw it in the trash. "I never wanted children," she said coldly. "Your father did. So don't expect me to pretend I care about your little drawings." I stood there, frozen. Tears streamed down my face, 7 years old, and my own mother had just told me I was unwanted. That was the day I learned the truth. My mother did not love me. She never had. And she never would. My father was my entire world. He was the one who hugged me when I cried. He was the one who helped me with my homework. He was the one who told me I was special, even when my mother made me feel like I was worthless. But my father worked long hours. He was building his business, trying to give us a better life. He didn't see what happened when he wasn't home. He didn't see the way my mother ignored me for hours. He didn't hear the cruel words she whispered when no one else was around. And he certainly didn't know about the punishments. Yet if I made too much noise, locked in my room without dinner, if I asked for anything, a toy, a book, a trip to the park, I was told I was greedy and selfish. If I cried, I was told to stop being dramatic. I learned very quickly to stay quiet, to stay invisible, to ask for nothing. Because in my mother's eyes, I was already nothing. But here's the thing about being treated like nothing your whole life. Eventually, you either break completely or you become unbreakable. And what happened next? It tested me in ways I never imagined. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, this is already terrible, I need you to brace yourself. Because the next part of this story, this is where everything gets worse. And I need you to pay close attention, because what happens here sets up everything that comes later. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button. Because stories like this, they don't come around often, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Things changed when I was 10 years old. That was the year my parents' marriage started falling apart. I would hear them arguing late at night. My father's voice, tired and confused. My mother's voice, sharp and accusing. "You're never here," she would scream. "I'm trapped in this house with that child and you don't even care." That child. That's what she called me. Not my name, just that child. The arguments got worse, and then one night my father sat me down and told me the truth. "Your mom and I are going to take a little break," he said gently. "But I promise you, no matter what happens, I will always be here for you." They separated. My mother moved out. And honestly, those were the happiest years of my childhood. For 2 years, it was just me and Dad. He would come home from work, and we would cook dinner together. He taught me how to play chess. He took me fishing on weekends. He made me feel like I mattered. For the first time in my life, I felt loved. But happiness never lasts when you're in a story like this, does it? When I was 12, my mother came back. She showed up at our door with tears in her eyes, begging my father for another chance. "I've changed," she said. "I was lost, but now I've found myself. Please let me come home." My father, kind and forgiving as he was, believed her. I didn't trust her, not for a second. But I was 12. Who was going to listen to me? She moved back in. And for a few months, things seemed better. But then she introduced us to someone new, Derek. Now, I want you to remember this name, Derek. Because this person is going to play a major role in everything that happens. And by the end of this story, you're going to despise him almost as much as you despise my mother. Derek was the son of a man my mother had been seeing during the separation. Yes, you heard that right. While my parents were taking a break, my mother was with someone else. And when that relationship ended, she had somehow convinced my father to let her bring Derek into our home. "He has nowhere else to go," she pleaded. "His father abandoned him. He needs a family." Derek was 2 years older than me. He was tall, athletic, and charming, just like my mother. And from the moment he walked through our door, everything changed. Suddenly, my mother had the child she always wanted. Derek got new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs. Derek got praise while I got criticism. Derek got love while I got silence. My mother would bake cookies for Derek but tell me I needed to watch my weight. She would attend all of Derek's football games but forget about my science fair projects. She would hug Derek and tell him how proud she was of him while I stood in the corner, invisible. Can you imagine that? Watching a stranger get the love you begged for your entire life? Watching your own mother treat someone else's son like her real child, while treating you like a burden. It broke something inside me. But I want you to hold on to this anger, because when the ending comes, it's going to feel so, so good. What I'm about to tell you is the hardest part of this story. If you need to pause and take a breath, I understand. But please, come back, because what happens after this tragedy is what makes everything worth it. The summer before my 17th birthday, my father collapsed at work. He had been complaining about chest pains for weeks, but he refused to see a doctor. He said he didn't have time. He said there was too much work to do. He was trying so hard to provide for us. He was killing himself trying to make everyone happy. And by the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. My father, the only person in the world who truly loved me, was gone. I remember standing at his funeral, feeling like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest. The sky was gray, rain was falling, and I stood there in a borrowed suit, shaking, crying, completely broken. And while I stood there, sobbing, my mother stood beside Derek, whispering something in his ear. She didn't even look at me. Not once. You know what's strange? Even after everything she had done, I still hoped, in that moment, that she would comfort me. I still hoped that losing my father would bring us together. That maybe, just maybe, she would finally see me as her son. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Weeks after my father's passing, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. "Your father left everything to me," she said matter-of-factly. "The house, the business, everything." I stared at her in shock. "What about me?" She smiled coldly. "What about you? You're still a minor. I'll take care of you until you're 18. After that, you're on your own." "But Dad would have wanted—" "Your father wanted a lot of things," she interrupted. "But he's gone now. And I'm in charge." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You will inherit nothing. Do you understand me? Nothing." Now, I know what you're thinking. There's no way this is legal. There's no way a father would leave his son nothing. And you're right. Something wasn't adding up. But I was 16. I didn't know anything about wills or estates or legal rights. And my mother? She made sure I never found out. At least, not until years later. Remember this moment, because it's going to come back in a very big way. On my 18th birthday, my mother made good on her promise. She handed me a small suitcase and pointed to the door. "You're an adult now," she said. "Time to take care of yourself. No cake, no celebration, no goodbye. Just a suitcase and a closed door." Derek stood behind her, smirking. He was already working at my father's construction company, the company my father had built with his own hands, the company that should have been my inheritance. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. I wanted to burn that house to the ground. But I didn't. I took my suitcase, walked out the door, and made a promise to myself. One day I would prove them all wrong. One day I would make them regret ever treating me like nothing. Now, what happens next is where this story transforms. This is where I go from victim to survivor. And if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or written off, this part is for you. If you're enjoying this story, drop a comment right now. Tell me about someone who counted you out. Tell me about someone who didn't believe in you. Because I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to feel something powerful. Let's keep going. For the next 10 years, I worked harder than I ever thought possible. I got a job at a warehouse, loading boxes for minimum wage. I worked double shifts. I saved every penny I could. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I ate cheap noodles for dinner. I wore the same 3 shirts for 2 years. But I never stopped pushing. I enrolled in night classes at a community college. I studied business and accounting while working 50 hours a week. I fell asleep at my desk. I woke up exhausted. I kept going anyway. I graduated with honors. And slowly I started climbing. I got a better job. Then a better one. Then an even better one. Every promotion felt like revenge. Every success felt like proof that my mother was wrong. By the time I was 28, I was a financial analyst at a respected firm. I had my own apartment, a real apartment with real furniture. I had savings. I had a future. I had built a life from absolutely nothing, no help, no inheritance, no family, just me. And here's what I want you to understand. During all those years of struggle, I had zero contact with my mother or Derek. I didn't call. I didn't write. I didn't check on them. I erased them from my life completely. It was the only way I could survive. But I heard things through distant relatives. I knew my mother had sold my father's construction business for a large sum. I knew Derek had wasted most of the money on failed investments, gambling, and bad decisions. I knew they had moved to a bigger house but were slowly running out of funds. And honestly, I didn't care. They were part of my past. In a painful chapter I had closed forever. Or so I thought. What I'm about to tell you is the moment this story takes a turn nobody saw coming. Not me, not my mother, and definitely not Derek. So lean in. Pay attention. Because this is where it all begins to unravel. One evening, I came home from work to find a voicemail on my phone. It was from a law firm I had never heard of. "This message is for the son of the late Harold Mitchell," the voicemail said. "We have an urgent matter regarding an inheritance. Please contact our office immediately." I froze. Harold Mitchell, my father. But my father had been gone for over a decade. His estate had been settled years ago. What could this possibly be about? I called the number the next morning. A woman answered. "Thank you for calling back. We've been trying to reach you for several weeks. This concerns the estate of Eleanor Mitchell." Eleanor Mitchell, my grandmother, my father's mother. She had passed away 3 months earlier at the age of 92. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. My grandmother had always been kind to me. She had tried to visit when I was young, but my mother always found excuses to keep her away. After my father died, I lost contact with her completely. I didn't even know she had been looking for me. "There's a reading of her will scheduled for next week," the woman continued. "Your presence is required." "Required?" I asked, confused. "Why?" The woman paused. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, but I strongly encourage you to attend. It's important." She gave me the date, time, and address. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I had no idea what to expect, but something deep inside me, some instinct I couldn't explain, told me this was going to change everything. Little did I know, I was right. The law office was in a tall building downtown. As I walked through the glass doors, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I hadn't seen my mother in over 10 years. I didn't know what I would say. I didn't know what I would feel. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away. But something kept me moving forward. When I stepped into the conference room, there she was, my mother. She looked older now. Her hair was gray, her face lined with wrinkles. The years had not been kind to her, but she still carried herself with that same cold arrogance I remembered. And beside her, of course, was Derek. He had gained weight. His expensive suit couldn't hide the years of laziness and bad decisions. His eyes were tired, his face bloated. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and contempt. "Well, well," my mother said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who decided to show up." I didn't respond. I simply took a seat on the opposite side of the table, and I waited. I want you to picture this room. A long conference table, dark wood, expensive chairs. On one side, my mother and Derek, sitting there like they owned the world. On the other side, me, alone, silent. And at the head of the table, an empty chair, waiting for the lawyer. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. And what was about to happen? None of us saw it coming. This is the moment. The moment I've been building toward this entire video. The moment that made every tear, every struggle, every sleepless night worth it. So take a breath and get ready. The lawyer, a gray-haired man named Mr. Patterson, entered the room and closed the door behind him. He had a thick folder in his hands and a look on his face that was impossible to read. "Thank you all for coming," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "We're here today for the reading of Eleanor Mitchell's last will and testament." My mother leaned forward eagerly. "Let's get this over with," she said dismissively. "I assume everything goes to me as her daughter-in-law and the caretaker of her son's legacy." Mr. Patterson looked at her over the rim of his glasses, and he said something that made my heart stop. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, that's not quite accurate." My mother's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" The lawyer opened his folder slowly, deliberately. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to provide some important context." He placed a document on the table. Eleanor Mitchell was a very careful woman. She loved her son Harold deeply, and she was devastated by his sudden passing. He paused, but she was also deeply concerned about what happened after his death. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Eleanor hired a private investigator several years ago," the lawyer continued. "She wanted to understand how her son's estate had been handled, and more importantly, how her grandson had been treated." I felt my chest tighten. The investigator's findings were deeply troubling. He looked directly at my mother. Eleanor learned that her grandson, Harold's biological son, had been disinherited, removed from the family home, and cast out with nothing at the age of 18. Derek scoffed. "So what? The kid couldn't handle real life. That's not our problem." Mr. Patterson ignored him completely. But that's not all Eleanor discovered. He pulled out another document, and when he spoke next, the room went completely silent. "This," he said, holding up the paper, "is a copy of Harold Mitchell's original will, the one he wrote before his death." My mother's face went pale. In this document, Harold clearly states that the majority of his assets, including the family home and his business, were to be held in trust for his son until his 25th birthday. I couldn't breathe. "This will was never executed," Mr. Patterson continued. "Instead, a different will was presented after Harold's death, one that left everything to his wife." He looked directly at my mother. His voice was cold as ice. Eleanor suspected that the original will had been suppressed. She couldn't prove it legally, but she made a decision. He opened another folder. Eleanor Mitchell spent the last decade of her life quietly rebuilding her own wealth. She sold properties. She invested wisely. And she made very specific instructions about what should happen after her death. He began reading aloud. I, Eleanor Mitchell, being of sound mind, hereby leave my entire estate, valued at approximately $2.3 million, to my grandson. I heard my mother gasp, but the lawyer wasn't finished. Additionally, he continued, I leave to my daughter-in-law and her adopted son exactly what they gave my grandson. He looked up. Nothing. Can you imagine that moment? Can you imagine sitting in that room, hearing those words? After everything they did to me. After being told I was worthless my entire childhood. After being thrown out with nothing. After building my life from the ground up with no help from anyone. And now, finally, justice. Not revenge. Justice. The silence in that room was deafening. My mother sat frozen, her mouth hanging open. Derek jumped to his feet. This is ridiculous. That old woman was crazy. We'll contest this in court. Mr. Patterson remained perfectly calm. You're welcome to try, he said. However, Eleanor anticipated this possibility. He pulled out another folder. She underwent multiple psychological evaluations in the final years of her life, all of which confirmed she was of completely sound mind. Derek's face turned red. She also provided extensive documentation of her grandson's treatment, testimony from neighbors, former teachers, family friends, all describing the emotional neglect he suffered. My mother's hands were shaking. And, the lawyer added, his voice dropping lower, if you choose to contest this will, all of that evidence, including the investigator's findings about the original will become public record. He let that sink in. Do you really want the world to know what you did? Derek opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My mother finally found her voice. She turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. You, she hissed. You did this. Here you poisoned that old woman against us. I shook my head slowly. I didn't even know Grandma was looking for me. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. I leaned forward. You made sure of that, remember? You kept her away from me, just like you kept everyone away from me. I stood up from my chair, and for the first time in my entire life, I looked at my mother without fear. You spent my entire childhood telling me I was worthless. You threw me out of my own home. You gave everything my father built to someone who wasn't even his son. My voice was steady, strong. And now? Now you get to feel exactly what you made me feel. I turned to the lawyer. Where do I sign? In the weeks and months that followed, my life changed completely. My grandmother had left me more than just money. She had left me letters, dozens of them, explaining everything. She told me how she had tried to stay in my life after my father's death, but my mother had blocked every attempt. She told me how she had watched from a distance, heartbroken, as I struggled to survive on my own. She told me how proud she was of the man I had become, even without her help. And she apologized. Over and over she apologized for not doing more. But she had done more than she knew. She had given me something my mother never could. She had given me closure. She had given me justice. She had given me peace. As for my mother and Derek, they tried to contest the will. They failed. They were forced to sell their expensive house to pay off debts. Derek's bad investments and gambling had finally caught up with them. Last I heard, and they were renting a small apartment on the outskirts of town. My mother tried to reach out to me multiple times, emails, letters, even a phone call, begging for help, begging for forgiveness. I never responded. Some people might call that cruel. Some people might say I should forgive, and maybe one day I will. But forgiveness doesn't mean you have to let someone back into your life. Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to forget what they did. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. And right now, I'm at peace. That's enough. If you're still watching, I want to speak directly to you. Maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you've been treated like you don't matter. Maybe you've been cast aside by the people who were supposed to love you. Maybe you've wondered if you'll ever escape the pain. I want you to know something. Your value is not determined by how others treat you. The people who hurt you, the ones who made you feel small, they don't get to define your worth. You do. I spent years believing my mother's words. I believed I was worthless. I believed I didn't deserve love or success or happiness, but I was wrong. And if you believe those things about yourself, you're wrong too. The best revenge isn't anger. It isn't hate. It isn't wishing bad things on the people who hurt you. The best revenge is living a life so full, so meaningful, so powerful, that the people who tried to break you can only watch in silence. My grandmother understood that. She didn't just leave me money, she left me a message. A message that said, "You matter. You always mattered." And nothing they did could ever change that. So if you're struggling right now, if you feel invisible, each forgotten, worthless, I need you to hold on. Your moment is coming. It might take years. It might take decades. But it's coming. And when it does, I hope you'll remember this story. I hope you'll remember that even in the darkest times, there is always light waiting for you. You just have to keep going long enough to find it. That's my story. The story of how my mother told me I would inherit nothing, and how a lawyer and a grandmother who never stopped loving me ended it all in a single moment. Now, I need to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been written off by someone who should have loved you? I read every single comment and I want to know your story. If this video touched you, if it made you feel something, smash that like button. It sounds simple, but it helps this video reach more people who need to hear this message. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications, because every week we share stories just like this one. Stories of betrayal, stories of heartbreak, stories of people who were counted out and came back stronger than ever. This is more than a channel. This is a community of survivors, of fighters, of people who refuse to be defined by their pain. Thank you for watching until the end. Seriously, it means more than you know. Take care of yourself. Believe in yourself. And remember, you are worth more than they ever told you. I'll see you in the next video.